Welcome back, everyone. This is Austin Reville with 2FxC Tactical on our From the Vault series featuring unique and historical firearms that come through our shop right here in New Prague, Minnesota. And we do have another one today for you. We have the Type 38 or Arisaka Type 38 carbine. Very unusual. We don't see a lot of carbines. These were made by the Japanese Empire. So the ones you see most of the time are the longer versions. I have one right here in my personal collection. Here's a Type 38 rifle. These were invented in 1905 and used all the way up through 1945, so they were used in World War I, along with the Russian wars and the various other wars that Japan would find themselves in up until the collapse of the empire. So they would take these guns and they shortened some of them, and then they ultimately came out with just a designed to be shortened version, which is what this one is here. There's just under 3 million of these particular rifles made, where the carbines were had a much smaller production run. The carbines were only about 580,000 of these were made. So these are a little bit more rare. You don't really see them that often. When you look at, say, the Type 99, which you see more often, it is kind of a tweener. So this one I have the bayonet on here, but this one's a little bit longer than the carbine, not much, about 20-inch barrel, 21-inch barrel to 18 to 19-inch barrel for the carbine. But they do feature some similar designs that would become associated with the Japanese gun making. But the Type 38 was invented right around at the turn of the 20th century, as everyone is kind of shifting towards a more Mauser-like carbines, just because of their effectiveness and they were a proven concept in the battlefield. So even in the United States, and I showed you in a previous video, we have the Springfield 1903 that we would adopt. Again, featuring very Mauser concepts, so much so that we would actually be paying royalties to Mauser for the production of this rifle while we were using it against the Germans in World War I because of patents. It's very fun firearm history you got going on around the early 1900s. So everyone is kind of adopting this kind of weapon system, and the Japanese wanted to modernize their military, so they adopted it as well. Gun making in Japan is somewhat new. The late 1800s, we actually sent people over from our military to help industrialize Japan. They invited us over. We sent military advisors. Now, while historically inaccurate the movie The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise is, in many ways, it does kind of speak to the period of industrialization and kind of the change in Japanese culture, and it ends up adopting kind of a weird hybrid of very traditional Japanese culture and the modernization and mechanization that would come with industrialization. But we did send people over, so they adopted some of our manufacturing techniques, which is why when you look at Japanese rifles, and this one will have it too, you can see that there are Arabic numbers, just like we have. There's no unique numbering system. That is kind of the influence of the United States, actually, shining through. Now, these particular rifles, the Type 38 carbines, were invented, or I should say they were built with this shortened overall feature to help engineers and kind of rearward troops, or troops that had another purpose. They weren't your everyday riflemen. So those combat engineers that are building the airfield, say like at Guadalcanal, take that for instance, not the people securing the perimeter, but the ones physically building. Very similar to our CBs. That's what these things were invented for. Maybe commanders, tankers, maybe. The reason why is you're in a confined space, usually with vehicles, or you are carrying other equipment, such as shovels or building supplies, and you don't have the overall capacity to carry a large, heavy rifle like the original Type 38. So they shortened them down in order to accommodate this. So these would feature, your kind of typical Japanese designs with a rounded bolt end cap with the pattern on it. This would have had a mum. This one was ground off, but you do see the Japanese lettering right below it. These did feature dust covers, just like everything else. This one is missing it. They did not do the monopod on this one because of its overall shortened feature. You have the bayonet lug right down here that would feature your typical Japanese bayonet. You have the wingtip designed right here on the front of the rifle. Let's see if I can the wing-tipped front sight post. As you can see, the outer wings protecting the inner sight post. You have the much shortened rear sight post here. So let's see if I can get this to lift up because it's very tight. You can see this is very short compared to, say, the original Type 38. The Type 38 is like double the length of the rear sight. Now, in some ways, this really doesn't matter. The Type 38 rear sight goes up to 2,300 meters. Just kind of good luck with a bolt-action rifle with iron sights. So in a lot of ways, this is actually way more realistic, though it does go up to, what's it, 1,800 meters. So this is still quite the shot for iron sights on something this short, but they did shorten it up as they kind of compressed the overall length of the gun. These were chambered in 6.5 Arisaka. The 7.7 cartridge that you would see in the Type 99 was a more modern, newer cartridge as opposed to what the Type 38s were chambered in. We should get in a little bit of cartridge and powder history here. You know, this comes into existence, or I should say the Type 38 platform in general, in 1905. The reason why we could have shorter rifles like this, or I shouldn't say we because I guess this is Japanese, but the reason why people could have shorter rifles like this is because of the invention of smokeless powder in 1884. So a lot of the older weapons had to have overtly long barrels because the original gunpowder is a much slower burning, lower pressure gunpowder. So you need a longer barrel in order for the pressure to build up to propel your bullet forward. Well, with smokeless powder that burns much quicker and much higher pressures, you don't need to have such a long barrel anymore to get the kind of velocity that you would see out of, you know, a 30+ inch barrel for the old powder guns. You can now see the same velocities out of something, say, 19 inches, just like this. So this really propelled firearm inventions forward with the ability to do that. So the Japanese hopped on board with this. We did have some carbine versions ourselves. I showed you last week the Krag Jorgensen. There were carbine versions of the Krag Jorgensen, again, in that smokeless powder vein. Again, kind of first time that we were able to do that, because when the Springfield 1873 was invented for the United States, smokeless powder hadn't been invented yet. It was what, 11 years? Yeah, 11 years before that would come out and be widely adopted. So the Japanese are hopping on to very early trends. Now, what we should mention about the Japanese, especially when it pertains to World War I, they were actually on our side. They came to the Allies' aid during World War I, and they would have brought rifles just like this. This is what they showed up with. These were very effective, very accurate rifles. While the carbine wouldn't come out until the 30s, they did actually have really, really good gun making skills very early. And this is kind of one of the, I would say, firearm myths about Japanese gun making. There are some guns that Japan made, especially during World War II, that got a little bit iffy. The Type 94 handgun, for instance, which I do have in my collection, which we'll bring out at one point, was a very poor firearm design. This is true. It's widely unsafe, considered one of the most unsafe handguns ever invented. There is some design flaws in that one, but when it comes to most of their guns, the Japanese are actually very good at making guns. The Type 99, which I showed you earlier right here, is extremely accurate. In fact, this one, I can put bullseyes at 150 yards, iron sights with this thing. This thing is extremely accurate, as is these. These were very accurate guns. Where the myth kind of grew is kind of just USGI, or lack of USGI knowledge. When we would bring back war trophies in World War II, we didn't understand that the Japanese made training rifles and they made live rifles. Training rifles usually featured the stock with big white lettering, in Japanese, of course, right here. It would be a cast iron receiver and a non-rifled barrel. And it was kind of slapped together up front because you would shoot blanks through it. It was designed just for training purposes. No live ammunition was supposed to enter the firearm, which is what the lettering down here would say. Well, USGIs, not being able to read Japanese, didn't know that. So they would grab whatever rifles they could find, bring them back, put live ammo in them, and they would blow up the receivers. So they got kind of a reputation as being unsafe. This was not true. It's just the reality of us not realizing that they had training guns and that they had just real guns, where we just kind of, I mean, if we had training guns, they were of 22 variant. They were live fire, not blank fire. This had a lot to do with the lack of raw materials in the Japanese Empire, which is why they cut some corners when it came to their training rifles. These are, again, very highly accurate. Unfortunately, the 6.5 Arisaka cartridge is, I won't say it's extinct, because you can find it. It's very expensive. It's getting pretty hard, pretty rare to find. This is true of 7.7 as well. Obviously, World War II went the way it did, which is the Allies came out on top. With that being said, that many of the cartridges made by the Axis powers, which Japan was a part of, went away. Now, we did adopt, obviously, 9mm as one of our standard handgun rounds, which was a Axis cartridge, but the 6.5 and 7.7 was not something we really saw. And again, as a collector, it's kind of sad because we can't really get a hold of those kind of cartridges much anymore. But anyway, I do appreciate you taking a moment to kind of go through this. Seeing a carbine is just really cool. We don't see a lot of carbines come through our shop. Again, only about 580,000 were produced, so not a whole lot of them out there. How many survived the war? Not that many. But we look forward to you coming back next time. We have more coming each and every week. We get so many cool firearms through here. And then we can also dive into my personal collection as well. I hope you like, comment, subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you. Till next time.